Dame Kelly, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, you are a national face. I think everyone pretty much in the country knows who you are. You're one of our most celebrated Olympians. You were the first Briton in over 80 years, nearly a century, to win the double, the 800 and the 1500 at the 2004 Olympic Games in Athens. You're pretty much an amazing person. I want to go back, if we can, to your childhood and how it all began. When did you realise that you had this talent?
So it was definitely at school. Now, I wasn't academic at school, so the thing that made me engage with it was sport. And I remember my PE teacher kind of taking me to the side and saying, right, you have two options. You can be no one, or you can focus on what you're really good at, and that is running. But you've got to believe in yourself, and I've always kind of kept that in my mind over my career. And she sent me off for a cross-country race, and I really did not want to do it. I mean, everyone's memories of cross-country at school was wet, wind, mud, you know, kind of like I had an afro hair, Airtex seafood shirt, you know, kind of the high-knee socks. I didn't want to do it at all, but I came second against a girl who everyone knew was really good at our age, and it gave me that fire in my belly that I hated losing. And suddenly I was like engaged, that was it. Sport was my thing.
So you joined the athletic club when you were 12, and then you went on to the English school's 1500 metres. This is 1983. You were 13 years old. It was your second season and you won it.
Yeah, so it was my first track season, and it was 1500 metres. I suppose I wasn't really scared at that time, because when you're only just starting anything, it's kind of like you've got nothing else to worry about other than trying to race. And I remember winning this race, standing on the rostrum and thinking, wow, this is like amazing. And then I kept that going throughout my school career, going to English schools. Didn't win again until I was 17. I think because I was inspired by sport, by watching Olympic Games when I was 14 years old.
But your story is so fascinating as well, because then you leave school at 16, you then go and work in a sweet shop, and you work as a carer, and then you join the army. So you are obviously this prestigious talent. It's quite clear you are exceptionally gifted. But then you stop doing it. What happened, Kelly? Why did that happen?
So I was inspired at age 14 to become Olympic champion after watching Sebastian Coe win the 1500 metres at the Los Angeles Olympic Games, and also to be in the army. And I think the army gave me a sense again of purpose. It gave me a driver and a feeling that I could do something for myself. So I tried to get into the army over when I was 15, 16, 17. They couldn't let you in till you were 17 and 9 months. That season I won my last English schools championship as well, and I also became mini youth Olympic champion and won a gold medal for my country. But I wanted a career, I really did. I was inspired by what I saw, you know, soldiers screaming and shouting at other soldiers going under the scramble net and over the 12-foot wall, and I was like, that is it, that's my life.
What I want to do.
So I ended up trying to join.
4 years later, you watch the Olympics again, and then you go back to training. So what happened? I just find this story so fascinating, because it's so not linear, but you end up at the apex of your career. So 22, you go back to athletics.
Yeah, so I'm watching the Olympic Games again now in my barrack room, which is a room with your bed, and, you know, that's where you live. And I saw this young girl who used to race against me from Kent, and she was in this Olympic Games. She was in the 3,000 metres, and I just looked there thinking, I mean, I know her, like Liz York, like, she's at the Olympic Games. And it just reignited the fire that I'd had in my belly when I watched it when I was 14 years old. And I don't know, there was something that came into my head that that's what I want to do. I really want to be Olympic champion. So I was already competing for the army, but I was sort of reluctantly doing it because I loved being a soldier. Suddenly I find myself at a World Championships for Great Britain. You know, and the story is actually a bit more fascinating, because every year as an elite sports person you have a national trials, and that national trials is to get you selection for that Games, Commonwealth, Europeans, World or Olympics. So you have to get generally in the first two and a selection time. So I rock up to this national trials in '93, being announced as Corporal Holmes as I was at the time. No one knew who I was, apart from people that knew me as a junior. And somebody said to me, you just got to chase these two girls. They're going for the world qualifying time. So I chased them, beat them, and got the qualifying time. There I was, finding myself in this team. So I clearly had a bit of like competitiveness that I've always had in my life.
You know, you look back on your 18-year-old self that didn't believe you could be an Olympian. Was there part of you that thought, I don't know if I can make it, and I'd rather do this because I think I can succeed, and I don't know about that?
I think sport wasn't a career opportunity really for you then. You know what I mean? Like it is now. You know, and even during my career, it's very amateur. You know, to actually finance your career in sport is relying on being one of the world's best and potentially sponsorship. So at the time, it wasn't really a career.
And now you're doing both. You're training and you're still in the army. And then at 27, I mean, at 27, you go full time. And then what happens? I mean, you go on in your 30s to win a double.
I know.
It's actually a bit nuts, isn't it? That's not the way round you're meant to do it, is it?
It really is. And people talk to me. And the funny thing is when I won 2 gold medals in Athens, of course, those that didn't know my career just suddenly think I'm winning 2 gold medals out of nowhere. Well, I was an international athlete for 12 years. I'd won 11 international medals at all of the top world class. I was between number 1 and 3 in the world for many, many years. But of course, the Olympics are the pinnacle. So most people watch the Olympics. Now, that was my 3rd Olympic Games. My first one I actually did while serving full-time in the military. Used to use my leave to go away and compete. I get a bronze. So I'm 30 years old and people are like, well, you must be retiring now.
This is the thing. You're meant to be retiring, and at 34, you win this double. Did you kind of, in your mind going into that Games, did you sort of think it's now or never, this is my last shot at this?
I think at 34, I thought the realistic thing was that would probably be my last Games. But probably what people forget is like middle distance running and women generally were peaking at 30s anyway, late 20s, early 30s, and having come back into my sport as a senior athlete relatively late, sort of at 23 realistically, because I missed that gap between junior and senior. I kind of had that in the bag. Plus I was a really strong female, having served in the military physically and mentally, I suppose, in one way. So yeah, just winning, you know, there's a long story, and the highs and lows were huge. You know, I had many injuries which affected both my mental and physical health. But the one thing I had, and the one thing that kept me going, is I believed I could do it.
You know, you are a national figure, you are properly famous, hugely successful, but there was an underbelly to all of this, wasn't there? You've been struggling with injury, and you were having some mental health issues, and you were self-harming, which you then talked about. Can you tell me what was going on underneath this outward success?
So, I mean, there's two areas. The one that was key and was very public was the fact that when you're trying to reach an elite standard, it's kind of not normal, you know what I mean? You're pushing your body and your mental capacity to the absolute limit, which maybe people don't always understand. You know, it became my life. It became everything that I ever thought of. And because it was who I believed I was at the time, that was me, it was my identity to be a sports person, every crush or blow was an injury or illness. You know, I went through stress fractures, ruptured calves, torn Achilles, glandular fever, tonsillitis, damaged femoral nerve in my back, and mental health problems 7 years out of my 12 years as an international athlete. And I got to a point when I was 33 years old, which was a year before the Olympic Games, getting ready for a World Championships, where I had a huge breakdown because the pressure, expectation on myself to be good. One, because I was battling with other things in my life, but two, because I really wanted to be an Olympic champion. And I got to a point where I didn't want to be here, quite frankly, but I did. You know, you have a battle in your head when half of you wants to live and half of you doesn't.
What do you mean? So you felt suicidal at times?
Yeah, absolutely, because, you know, you push yourself to an extreme, and my identity at the time was purely about sport, because I didn't feel I had one as Kelly Holmes. I had one as the athlete Kelly Holmes. And so I lived on thriving to succeed. So when I basically became a self-harmer in a training camp in France because I didn't have an outlet. We didn't really talk about mental health. If you think about 2003, was there much talk about mental health openly? No. So I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't know what a breakdown meant. All I know is that I was screaming inside, and to release that pain was to hurt myself. It wasn't obviously the best thing I could have done. I could have probably spoken to someone, but I didn't know, because you get fearful of opening up.
Do you mean that in terms of your career, that because Kelly Holmes, because your identity was elite athlete, if your body was injured, you would feel, what's the point of Kelly Holmes? If I can't run and win, then what's the point of, that's how you felt?
Yeah.
That's really tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I really did. And it was hard because all I had in my mindset was this Olympic Games. Because I never, not just that one Olympic Games, but being a world-class Olympian and having an absolute, I don't know where it come from, but I always believed I would be Olympic champion.
And so the prospect of that not succeeding
yeah,
was something you couldn't even forgive yourself for, even though some of the injury problems are out of your control, right?
They're out of your control, but I also think that in hindsight it made me who I am. You know, now post it, I believe in fate. You know, before it was just hell, but post it I think, well, I was meant to go through this journey, you know, I was meant to fight to earn it, because I didn't think I'd win 2 gold medals. I mean, who wakes up and thinks, yeah, I can be a double Olympic champion? You know, it's not something I dreamed of, but I did it.
Because I remember watching you, like the nation watched you, and then for you to achieve that, but then be open about what was really going on, that they can be outwardly successful, but they're battling issues that aren't being discussed. It's actually quite brave. Was it hard to talk about it, or was it cathartic?
So I didn't speak about it to anyone until I retired in 2005 and I was writing my first autobiography. The reason being because I actually never knew how to talk about it. So when people say to me, well, how did you get off of being the low of the low and win 2 gold medals? The reason why is because I opened up a lot more to my team around me about needing help and support, but not about the mental health side, because I still didn't know how to do that.
Right.
But what I did is bring on board and say, look, I know I can do this if I stay injury-free. Because actually being the lowest low, I couldn't go any lower with what I'd gone through over my career. So in a way, that empowered me to go, if I can still win medals. So in my head, it drove me to success. So I brought people around me, like you would in any area of life. I brought people who believed in me, people that could keep me healthy and injury-free, keep me motivated. I was still self-harming, but there were moments when it was reminding myself of what I'm going through, what I've gone through. It was like always a cry for help, but it was lessened because when I wasn't getting injured, I felt better.
So you knew about your sexuality, you said, when you were 18, but you kept that hidden for over 3 decades. You kept that as a secret. Why did you keep that hidden for so long?
Yeah, I mean, it is a long story, but it's, I suppose the significance of it is that health became an issue in terms of how you feel about yourself. So during COVID, we all coped with things very differently, didn't we? You know, I actually became a bit of a gym bunny. I was doing everything because I was at home, you know, and going out running, using the time that we had to do it. Yeah, I got COVID. And because I am someone that likes to keep active, keep fit, and then I'm laying out for 3 weeks, it drove me insane. And it was almost then the start of me thinking about just how I feel about myself. It really kind of had an impact, and it just made me realise that, you know, life can be so short for so many people. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I want to start living my authentic life. I want to be me. And so I decided that I needed to, at some stage, talk about the authentic me, which is being a gay woman, in public. I mean, I've always been it to my friends and family.
So your friends and family knew?
Yeah,
it was
always
just...
known, yeah. So it was that public thing that I had to keep secret, and a lot of it was to do with my time in the army. But it had an effect on my mental health hugely, because I thought, I don't want to die with my friends and family saying, what, isn't it a shame that she just can't be herself? So the impacts on my mental health were huge through my whole career. But of course, I was able to hide the talk of mental health through my sporting career. So sport has actually been my saviour through lots of different reasons.
When I read about you coming out, you said you called your brigadier, basically your superior in the army, to ask about that. Now, lots of people will go, why on earth would Kelly feel the need to do that?
Well, put it in a very short way, there was a ban in the military that stopped people homosexuality, and that ban only got lifted in 2000. I served during that ban, and also there was no talk about sexuality in sport either, in international sport. You wouldn't really talk about homosexuality in sport or in the military. So for me, I had these overarching fears inbred in my life for so long that fear is debilitating. You can't just suddenly let go of fear. And the only way I felt that I could change that was to know there'd be no repercussions if I publicly said that I was a gay woman from the army, even though I have a complex relationship with the army because I'm an honorary colonel.
You're groundbreaking because you were hugely successful as an Olympian, but you talked about mental health. And you were groundbreaking because you were successful in the army and a successful sportswoman, and you talked openly about sexuality. So two things that you battled with, then you spoke about that help other people, no doubt, to open up. I wanted to ask you about this, about whether things are changing. You know, the Prince and Princess of Wales were on Radio 1 this week on Newsbeat talking to younger people about World Health Day and about how people need toolboxes to talk about mental health. Do you think that things are getting better, that people are able to talk about, there isn't such a stigma?
I do think we're getting there. I do think it all comes with anything about visibility, transparency, and seeing people talking and having that platform where it's safe to talk. I think people who are in the public eye who start talking in that realm, it makes other people that have either watched you or been inspired with you think, oh, okay, it happens to anybody. So I do think there's a power in people who are very public talking. To help those that feel isolated or feel that there's no way they could ever do it in their life. I do think there's a power to that. So I do think it's changing. I think it changes, but there's more that needs to happen.
And you were talking about the pandemic and your own mental health, and you know, lots of people. I think I read 2 million people are suffering from long COVID. Obviously, there were huge challenges of the lockdowns and isolation. A big impact on the nation's mental health, and now we've got a cost of living crisis. Yeah. Do you think that we are, or do you worry that things are going to get worse because of the sort of two huge and quite external events that have kind of knocked, both sort of nationally knocked us all, but just individuals struggling with the fallout of COVID, struggling with current sort of anxiety over how to make ends meet?
Absolutely. So I've been working with Nuffield Health, who have produced a sort of index, basically, and done some research on the impact of mental and physical well-being. And it shows that 1 in 3 people, mental health has absolutely got worse over the last 12 months.
That's a lot, isn't it?
That's having a huge impact on society generally. I mean, if you think, you mentioned around the cost of living, around the access to support. You know, people are suffering. Young and old are suffering. And I do think that the government as a whole have to take some action to recognise that physical and mental health go side by side. So when you're talking about impacts on society generally, people who are not taking up the jobs, and there's plenty of jobs out there. You know, why is this happening? You know, why is people's mental health deteriorating? They have to look at this to put, well, we're trying to fight for a 10-year a 10-year kind of a proposal so that the government actually put out, like, let's say, a legislation to say that they both are as important as each other, because I've seen it. So they're saying that the government guidelines, or the health guidelines, is 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. Moderate activity is just a brisk walk. Nationwide, the average is 65 minutes per week. That means just over 10 minutes a day, we might be briskly walking. That's it. So why are we getting more obese? Why is our mental health getting really bad? Why is there a huge issue with teenage mental health and suicide? Because we're not looking at the importance of being active and how that correlates with up here.
So you would like, number one, you think that the government should have a proper 10-year strategy about trying to improve the nation's health. And that needs to be linked to trying to encourage people to be more active, because we know the link between physical activity and improved mental health.
We'd like the government to publish a 10-year strategy where it combines the importance of mental and physical health, well-being, being on par with each other. Because we know that there is a really big correlation between both. They are so important. So I talk about, in a way, the negative side of me pushing to be an elite athlete and the pressures it had on my mental health. But I now have to do and be active for my mental health. I have to get out and do something, whether that's in the gym, whether that is just a walk to breathe, to take the stresses and pressures that I might feel, whether that is calling a mate and saying, do you fancy going out, you know, for a run? Do you fancy doing even an online workout, core workout with me these days? I have to do that just to feel good.
Do you think then at the moment the government are letting people down on mental health? You do?
I do, because we're not recognising the importance of them going side by side. I think, you know, it's a huge... If you look at the impact of mental health and how the stats have risen to those that are suffering, and then the costs on the NHS because they're having to combat people's mental health problems, why aren't we realising that they go side by side?
Your message would be, if you could sort of see, you know, if the Health Secretary's watching this and she could make one change now, what sort of thing would it be, Kelly? Would it be more provision for sport in schools? Would it be more free access to gyms for the public? What sort of practical things would you say, please, can you introduce this?
I think firstly, to recognise and publish a joint strategy for mental and physical health, so that money and, you know, whatever money goes to people's health, it recognises that it's for mental and the physical side, whatever that might be. I think that when we're looking at it, the cost of living is huge. So if we're talking about people, let's say, eating healthier, if the cost of our shopping, let's say, is getting so far out there, what are people going to do? Get the quick fix, cheap products. Most of those aren't that healthy, you know, because all the healthy things seem to be expensive. So why don't we look at just that cost of living in terms of our health generally? Definitely the provision for people to access more facilities, to do more sport. If you're from a disadvantaged area of deprivation, you don't have the means, you don't have the access, yet your health is actually worse off because of that. Of course, schools need to prioritise the need for it to become a priority that kids do more PE and activity in school time. They're neglecting this. They're putting it on to coaches, putting it on to parents to facilitate it out of school. What does mental health do when you feel... So I can say, when I do something active, and I know this, I feel good, like I'm more alert, I'm kind of ready to go, I feel good in myself. Same with young people. You know, you need to get them moving, make them feel better about themselves. They'll be more attentive in school.
Just in terms of your journey with mental health and sport, we saw some examples of that with very, very successful female athletes over the past year. There was Simone Biles, the amazing gymnast who had to pull out of some of the competition in the Tokyo Olympics. We had the tennis star Naomi Osaka pulling out from the French Open over mental health issues. Presumably, one, you could resonate with how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And two, do you think it's progress that they're able to do that rather than keeping it hidden in a way? Because both of them were quite criticised in different ways, weren't they?
I think it's brilliant that these young people in sport are having the confidence and ability to talk about the effects that they're having as young people through their mental health problems. Regardless of the fact that they're world-class athletes, they're human beings first and foremost. And I think we have to look at that. You know, people need support, people need access to talk, but they need a safe environment. So you need to be able to open up and express it. I do think that when you get people coming out who are young and talking about the impacts, as long as there's backed up by their support mechanisms, there's a huge amount of charities out there, I must say that. Anyone that is suffering and listening to our conversation, there's so many charities out there that can support you through this journey, because most of it's about conversation. Once you have conversation, you open up, you get that support. It could be a huge relief.
Dame Kelly Holmes, thank you for spending some time. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.